Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Enabling Infrastructure as a Service in Your Enterprise Cloud webinar. Today we have Nick Colyer, our Solutions Principal, and Tim Carr, our Senior Solutions Architect, on this webinar. We'll be doing questions during the webinar. If you have any, please just put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. We will also be recording this and sending this out to all attendees and registrants at the end as well. If we don't hit your question, Nick and Tim will answer it afterwards and send it out when we send out our recording. So right now I'm going to pass it on to Nick and Tim.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. We'll do a couple of quick intros here if you want to fire off first, Tim.
Yeah, first, I'm Tim Carr. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect here at Head. I'm a specialist in the cloud automation and orchestration side of our organization. That means I touch everything from public cloud to private cloud to configuration management and the scripting glue and orchestration glue that will tie all those components together. I'm joined here by Nick Colyer, who's our Solutions Principal. Nick, go ahead.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Yep. Like Tim, I work alongside the cloud practice, and my role here is to kind of help large-scale enterprises stitch all these things together and offer them, truly as a service to, your customers of IT, whether those are developers, whether those are just standard, projects you're trying to spin up and get services up and running. And that's really what kind of led us to this webinar. A lot of requests, from customers saying, okay, it's one thing if I adopt things from Amazon or if I just offer VMs up, but how do I offer them in an enterprise fashion? And so the term enterprise infrastructure as a service really coined from there. And this is kind of our agenda today. We try to make it a bit of a mixture of PowerPoint and demos for you. So we're going to start off with the enterprise cloud vision, just how we see it and how we've seen large-scale Fortune 100 companies adopt cloud in their enterprise. This discussion of enterprise IaaS versus standard public cloud IaaS. So you hear from Amazon, they've got IaaS services. You hear from Azure. What's the difference when we mean enterprise IaaS there? How do we onboard services? And then in more and more detail, it's one thing for us to just throw a bunch of slides at you, but it's we want to show you the tool sets and the approach, how we actually stitch these things together using a number of tool sets. So we're going to go through some examples using VMware VRA VRO. That's the the VMware Cloud Management Platform and Orchestrator. ServiceNow, we'll show you how we built a catalog there. Tim is then going to hit on the Amazon CloudFormation templates and how we leverage those to provision Amazon services. And finally, we always like to hit a bit of operations and change control and things like that. So we're going to talk about how Amazon can talk back to ServiceNow as well. So with that said, let's jump right in. And, one of the things we like to start off with is innovate like a startup, operate like an enterprise. A lot of what we're doing here has been born from, the promise, if you will, from Amazon and Azure going to various, enterprises and saying, hey, we've got these services. We see startups, like the Netflixes and all these other companies out there able to innovate very, very quickly. And that's great when you're a very small company, but how do you scale that when you're, 1,000 plus VM, 10,000 plus employee company,
Yeah, Nick, I think you hit a really good point there. Like when you start thinking about the Netflixes and the Facebooks and so on and so forth, when you think about the product that they're delivering, they're really delivering one thing, right? Netflix is, hey, deliver me this video, right, to my device. But when I think of an enterprise, I mean, I go into Fortune 100, Fortune 50 enterprise, and you say, hey, how many apps do you guys have?
Yeah.
And literally, they will say, I don't know, it's in the thousands, right? And in maintaining each of those apps requires a team that knows about the app. It requires certain protocols for how you're going to update the app. It involves certain protocols for how you're going to back the app up and how you keep it available. And really, that's what this picture is here to demonstrate. We need to be able to take an enterprise view with the guardrails that it takes to actually operationalize multiple sets of applications, and then combine that with our capabilities to speed time to delivery. And black shoes, red shoes. I actually really like this picture. It's very cool.
Yeah. No, I think that this is the message. This is what we're trying to solve, right? How do you be that agile and still be safe? Is another way to put it. And so these are the challenges that we see, and I think, as we approach these conversations with a lot of our customers, the first thing to do is you see the cloud on the right there, is this a bad word or a good word for you, right? Some people hate the word. We think the words have been overused and transformed in multiple ways. But do you have a drive for cloud, right? What are your challenges, right? Because there's no point in just saying, oh, I need Azure or Amazon, it's going to fix all my problems, right? You need to solve the challenges that you have. And these are, a list. We're not going to go through all these yet, because obviously we want to move on to the meat of things. But, I'm sure some of these resonate with you, particularly, consistency in deployments. Public cloud alone isn't going to fix that for you. It gives you the ability to innovate, but then how do you do that safely? And so I think, keep the challenge in mind, keep what you're trying to solve in mind, as we look at this. And this is kind of, the story that we see time and time again from customers. This is the old way to get an IT service, right? You go into a project meeting or a development team says, hey, I need a bunch of servers because I'm trying to spin up a new application. And then it feels like we're passing this piece of paper around between teams. And some people just automate that process, which doesn't really transform in many ways unless you change a lot of the other things around it as well. But this is what we're ultimately trying to solve, right? We want the promise of cloud and enterprise cloud is that I don't have this problem anymore. I've got self-service, I've got automation, I've got things behind this to actually eliminate all this, and I can just go to a portal or go to my continuous integration and delivery platform and consume exactly what I need.
Yeah, when I look at this slide, I think the thing that it really tells the best, right, is the actual hands-on keyboard time is for many of these tasks is very small.
Right.
What we're really trying to eliminate is the handoff time, right?
Yeah.
Like the time that it takes for me to finish drinking my green tea or whatever, and then come back and then look at my inbox. Oh, I didn't check my email in the last 30 minutes. Oh wow, I missed 2 requests, and now my green tea time in my 30 minutes where I wasn't checking my email is now added on to our server request process, and really that's how things turn into 2-week time cycles and SLAs that govern how quickly things have to be done within enterprises, which is the #1 barrier that we go in and try to break apart in a workshop approach.
And clearly you can tell Tim Carr could do an entire webinar just on green tea.
Absolutely.
And how long it takes to sort all that out. Let's keep going there. So no, it's a great point, and I think another way to also look at this as we get into the tools area is it's our cloud, right? I mean, I think there's some pride in that in IT. If you start to look at I'm not just taking the Amazon cloud and presenting it, to the business. I'm going to say, okay, well, what does the business want? Okay, I've got things in Amazon I can use. This is our cloud. It's where our applications run. It's where our data lives. It's a mixture of on-premises infrastructure for the use cases that make sense there. It's a mixture of, public cloud services, and that may not all be VM services. We had to talk about IaaS today, but there's a whole PaaS discussion, that's for a future time. It's also, I think, the most important thing that we've sort of gravitated towards now is our enterprise cloud is the way you consume services. And there's 2 major ways. It's the catalog you go to when you want to request something, or it's the CI/CD tool set and your DevOps tool chain that you go to when you want to do application and infrastructure automation together. And it's enterprise ready. Again, security, compliance, change management, all these things built in. So if we think of solving all of these problems, this is what gets us, to the enterprise cloud. It's worth also just kind of, demystifying some of these terms very quickly. Now, if we think of the cloud definition, really it's the piece on the right, the essential cloud characteristics, right? Self-service, heavily automated, resource pool in, elasticity, and cost management measured, metered around that. And, there's been these deployment models, private, which a lot of people, there's been a lot of private cloud failures, right? A lot of people try to do things like, oh, I want to build Amazon on-premises. Well, you're never going to be able to do that, right? And then a lot of people now have gone public or in a hybrid model. And I'd say I don't think any customer I talk to today isn't looking at a hybrid model. On-premises only has gone away for the most part.
Right. I think every organization is looking at public cloud for one reason or another. Maybe it's the development ring in the organization and so on and so forth that's gone out and said, hey, I can do this quicker. I can avoid the time. Maybe it's a project that's set up to fail fast. So, you need to do a proof of concept on a solution and not spend $5 million on infrastructure just to know if it works or not, do that in the public cloud. There's decisions to run things both on-prem and in the public cloud. What we're really here today to talk about is how you can enable a very similar approach for how you get your version of your infrastructure as a service, meaning your VM, delivered to your organization regardless of the platform.
Yeah, and I think as we focus here on infrastructure as a service, keep in mind that a lot of the same principles are applied to the other layers as well, but we're obviously going to go focus on IaaS, but, guardrails apply everywhere.
Absolutely. You have to take care of availability, you have to take care of security, you have to take care of all of your, your governance, risk compliance protocol within your organization. All those things have to be solved for regardless of what platform you choose to use, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and there's there's different methodologies that you can leverage for all of those. And, we're deep in several of those areas. We're happy to have those discussions. But today, really just infrastructure as a service, and really how do we deliver that VM in a consistent and meaningful way.
Yeah, and so if we start here on the Amazon grid of services, I'm sure everybody's seen this by now, and we've got the Azure one as well here, right? We'll sort of stick to the Amazon slide. It's just a little bit easier, visually, but you can see the extent of services in the bottom of the Azure one, and we'll just jump back to the Amazon one. And if we think about every single one of these services, a big mistake a lot of people make is they go to Amazon, they onboard Amazon, and they just start consuming all of these services, and they turn these services into production very quickly. And Tim mentioned earlier, a playground is a great place to get familiar with these. Oh, there's something on the webinar there we go. It's a great place to experiment, but we ultimately want to make these enterprise ready. So start to think of, let's look at the Amazon catalog, and let's onboard and operationalize these services. And what that looks like is build your own cloud consumption model. Start to think of building your own grid of services. If we take an Amazon service, the first one I'm bringing up here is actually a PaaS service. It's a database service there. We're going to bring it up, and that's going to be offered as an enterprise PaaS service. How am I going to log it? How am I going to authenticate against it? Who gets access to it? And then look at one of our IaaS services like, EC2 and EBS and the other things that come in there, agents, monitoring, backups, all the other things that we need to do on top of that. Let's wrap that around that and offer that as an IaaS service. Same on premises, right? Here's one example, one of the storage companies we work with. We can offer some of the, services that they offer for data replication and things, up in our cloud. And then same for a vSphere VM, agents, monitoring, patching, backup, IP. I'm sure, everybody on this webinar can list a whole bunch of things that they do all the time. How do I kind of, take those things, take the public cloud service or my on-premises service, wrap them around there, and offer a richer experience to my users.
Yeah, the delivery chain really doesn't change whether for any of these components. What you have to do is you have to define everything that goes into your build for each of these components, and you have to put the appropriate guardrail in for each service that you're going to enable. And I think it's very interesting that when you look at Amazon Web Services and you look at the VMware example that Nick just talked about, you see the exact same requirements around monitoring, around how I deliver IP address, all of those sorts of things, how I back up, so on and so forth. You see those exact same things happen regardless of platform, and really that's what we have to enable.
Yeah, and again, just to come back to the point of our cloud, or I treat this as I'm building our enterprise cloud. I need to market this. I need to go in front of town halls. I need to tell people about this and get them to come here and consume, from us, in a proper, responsible way, not go straight to the public cloud. And the other big thing to think about when you go into public cloud, they're two very different architecture approaches, right? When you look at on-premises high availability and, the hardware that we buy, it's designed for 5 nines availability. We're designing around mean time to failure of certain hardware components. In the public cloud, we're designing around mean time to recovery. So we build a lot of self-healing. We expect that these data centers are going to have outages. We expect our host running in Amazon is going to break down, and the app needs to be tolerant of that. And that's absolutely key.
And I think that's really a limitation to the platform that we're looking at. I think as we, when we had the big VMware push in IT, what VMware did is it definitely gave that foundation that people could take care of, like for their availability in their environments. As you look to public cloud doesn't have such great guarantees around will that EC2 instance stay up. That EC2 instance might die, that host might die, and we see a bigger burden placed on application refactoring so that we can enable the proper services so that our app maintains high availability constructs. I think the needle's been shifted that way within the enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what's bringing the cost down on public cloud, right? They're using commodity hardware versus the expensive, highly available things that we use in our data centers today. So how do we build it, right? So we've kind of got the layout. We want to build this amazing experience for our customers. Well, how do we do? It's with automation and orchestration. Big part of all these engagements we do around automation orchestration, and there's 3 major tool sets that you really need around this, and there's various ways to piece these together, and we're going to show you a few of them today. First one is cloud lifecycle management. Second piece is an element of orchestration. That could be, using these declarative tools like Terraform, could be using more procedural-based tools, could be using CloudFormation templates. We'll go into some of that. And then configuration management. Everybody knows about Puppet, Chef, etc. That's still the primary way to do configuration in an infrastructure as a service model. Containers are kind of a layer above, really. We see platform as a service, etc. But when we're looking at infrastructure as a service, some people are arguing, well, is Puppet Chef still alive today? These things, absolutely, because people are still doing a lot of IaaS, but there's other ways in the future to deploy apps as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would almost add to this slide, we've got cloud lifecycle management, we've got orchestration, we've got configuration management. It's where do we interject when we're going to take this and make it meaningful from a consumption perspective, and how. So really, I think around the cloud lifecycle management area, I think you almost need to have like another little couple lines that say, hey, you can consume this either by a user selecting it, or maybe we're even going to consume that from a programmatic perspective, like via API. That's the one other thing to add here.
Yeah, and so if we look at what that first piece is designed to do, from we talk about cloud management platforms. One thing to keep in mind, a cloud management platform doesn't have to be a specific product you buy from a vendor. This could be something that you tailor, that you already have. If you've got a service catalog and combine it with some orchestration and combine it with configuration management, you've created your own cloud management platform, and it may be simpler than a lot of the vendor solutions out there as well. But the goal here is, what am I trying to do from cloud management, from a life cycle standpoint, right? I've got to provide a mechanism for somebody to request something. I've got to put guardrails around that request and approval policies around that. In VMware environments, it's typically like, okay, how many CPUs, memory, disk, etc. Maybe some teams are just like, build as much as you want up till you hit this limit. In the Amazon environment, we'll show you something. We've got our bad cop, script Lambda function that we use a lot here. When somebody tries to provision one of these largest Amazon images, it just checks it and destroys it immediately, right? Or doesn't even let them do it in the first place.
Right. We don't want to be paying $1,000 a day to be running like one of these Excel Amazon.
And this happens. We have it because somebody kept doing it. I mean, we're not sure if it was a joke or trying to, test the CTO or what, but nevertheless, we built some workarounds in for that. And but you can see the point here, right? And the key thing is, when we get to provision, this is the point of handoff. To Tim's point, this could be via an API, this could be via a catalog consumption model, to the orchestration level, the automation procedures that are going to take effect to provision that service. That allows us to have the consistency. Then we enter the manage phase, and that's how we keep it consistent. And then the automation to retire it, and if necessary, archive it so we can redeploy it again if it's not like a modern application.
I think there's one thing that I really want to focus on this slide as well. Something that I focused on in workshops a lot. You'll see the approval box here. I like having approvals on the slide because it's a necessary evil, but ideally you've automated to the point where you eliminate as many approvals as possible. Remember what we said earlier, it's the time that it takes me to look at my inbox to know that I have to approve something that's actually extending the process here. So we need to make as many things as auto-approved as possible in these processes. Consider that for your implementation.
Yeah, and I think when we talk orchestration, there's been a lot of talk in the industry around this because it's probably the biggest shift in terms of skill set people have had to have. There's another one we'll come on to later on the user experience, but this is where people are having to learn programming. They're having to learn, to write JSON files, for CloudFormation templates that you'll see in a little bit, learning JavaScript, things like that. Because ultimately we're trying to do, a couple of things with orchestration. On premises, might be requesting an IP, updating DNS, configuring an F5, updating backup, in the public cloud, similar kind of thing. Maybe I'm requesting an IP, maybe not. Maybe I'm using kind of a DHCP solution out there. I'm getting an EC2 instance, I'm configuring an ELB and joining to Active Directory. But the orchestration is a little bit different when you look at on-premises versus public cloud. In the public cloud, we want to leverage, wherever possible, a lot of the native automation capabilities in there because they're much more declarative for the most part than kind of orchestrating, which is do this, then go run this task, then go run this task, then go run this one, et cetera, et cetera. In the public cloud, it's more, Amazon, Azure, have their ARM and CloudFormation templates that we want to use there. So on-premises, though, when you look at these individual boxes, you can see our goal also is not to build one giant workflow that does everything and is one giant Power CLI script or anything like that. It's to modularize everything into individual components so we can set standards and procedures around those individual components. And if we wanted to, say, take the request IP and update DNS, present that as a service, we could just have that as a service in our catalog. If we wanted to be part of an entire build process, we just stitch together all the right workflows we need, and that's part of our build process. And you'll see a similar approach later on the CloudFormation and ARM side. There's a way to segment off different templates, depending on teams as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really want to add here, the reason why we take the microservices approach as opposed to one big thing is because when you're thinking about doing this for an enterprise, you have to think that different teams own different capabilities. And eventually, in the best vision, you have representatives from each of those teams as part of your overall cloud team. That representative might be in charge of maintaining your orchestration microservice. So, for example, the networking individual might be in charge of helping to maintain the networking request microservice, the networking IP request microservice, as well as maybe the F5 microservice. That allows the networking team, for example, to still own the appropriate processes that they would in the overall life cycle of their environment.
And this is a key piece. As we go through, if anyone has any questions particularly on this, this is where a lot of the rework happens, compared to the old way of doing things, definitely, fire it off to us and we'll try to answer or even show you if we can in this time. The final, piece of all of this really is the configuration management side, right? If you think of the orchestration for the most part in an IaaS model, it gets everything up. It gets a VM online, configured the way we want with our, monitoring configured and backups and things like that and on-premises. But what does it do in, from a configuration standpoint? It doesn't really, you could use an orchestration tool to log in, install a piece of software, but it's not very, maintainable in the long term. And so this is where configuration management tools ultimately come in, right? Our puppets, our chefs, our salts, our Ansible that we see a lot of today. And the approach here is very similar to a microservices style approach as well, where you might have a module for installing IaaS as a web server, a module for our Windows-based configuration that might contain all our agents that we install on the machine, security, authentication things as well that we want to put in there. And we compose all of that into an application stack that gets a role. So in this case, we've got an IaaS server that basically contains the Windows profile, the IaaS profile, and the security profile, and that becomes a role. And that could be in Chef with recipes, Puppet with modules, salts, whatever you want it to be. But that's how you give that VM that gets deployed in the IaaS model an identity, a profile for it. So here's my Windows or Linux machine. Oh, you just became a web server. You just became a SQL box.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Nick. The thing that I like to encourage organizations to look at is when you think orchestration, think about everything that's not happening within the VM itself, right? The last thing you do with orchestration typically is maybe you will reach into the VM once to install that configuration management agent. And the reason why you do that is because after you've done this process, the orchestrations are typically executed once. You still need configuration management to update and manage your whole fleet.
Yeah, your next release, so you want to push some more software, and also it allows you to, if you want to blow this VM away and redeploy it in a web server, you can just do that because you have the exact configuration. Yes. Orchestration deploys the VM again, you have the identity of it, rinse and repeat. And this is what it looks like start to finish, right? So you kind of put in your request, hopefully not at least on an iPad or iPhone nowadays, right? And then hands off to orchestration from your catalog or via API. There's a bunch of things, get a server name, believe it or not, that still is the hardest conversation in every workshop is getting people to detach from the names they love so much. But, we do some pre-clone stuff, then we clone a VM, and then we do some kind of post-clone stuff. I would say in the Amazon Azure world, there's a lot less of the pre-clone activities. It's much more, hey, I want this service. But the post-clone stuff, like Tim said, we install a configuration management agent. It's the last thing that orchestration tool does. Hands off to Puppet, Chef, whatever. Azure has something called like Azure extensions for applying your Puppet profile and basically then, installs your configuration. And we rinse and repeat this. If we go back a moment there, this process, you're typically going to have 10 to 15 areas of orchestration in the middle there between public cloud and on-premises. But the process is rinse and repeat. What do I want to provide? How do I get the VM online? Once that part's done, most of the work is really in this configuration management piece. How do I offer different sets of configurations that I want to offer there? And a future discussion, again, is, is it that I drop a container on there now as well, right? There's things that we can do there also. So with that said, let's kind of, show you what this actually looks like and how we assemble some of this together. So Going to jump over to, first of all, we'll look at is ServiceNow in this case. And one of the things you'll notice, is we've kind of customized heavily a lot of these portals here. So let me log back in here quickly. Order a service. And you can see you can start to divide up into different, there's various ways to design these GUIs, right? We've got smart onboarding for Active Directory provisioning. We've got a CMDB section here we can go into. But the part we want to focus on is infrastructure and application services. So you can see here, very basically at the beginning, you've got to provision an AWS EC2 instance and provision a VMware VM. So if I go into the EC2 service, let's do a Linux one here as an example. I'm going to get a form up here any second now. There we go. You can see this is an Ubuntu 14.04 image. And I can start to ask a lot of questions as well, right? Do I really want to ask them what network and VPC and things go in? No, I want to ask them, is it PII data? Has it got PCI data? Has it got HIPAA? Those are some things I can do that then drive decisions through the orchestration for placement decisions. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you really hit it there. When you think about designing a view for a user to make a selection out of a catalog, it's key to try to pre-populate as much of this stuff as possible. The reason why a user and the reason why organizations are switching to this stuff is it's supposed to be easy. I can't tell you how many environments I go into and I see the IT selection portal to be able to spin up a VM has 40 different questions that you ask, and it has 12 different approval processes, or that's how people conceptualize doing this. Try to think about how you can make this process as user-friendly as possible, because that's the desire, and that's why we're moving this way.
Absolutely, and even you can see, like in Amazon, there's all these sizes. Do your users even know what an M3 is and a C3 and a T? You've got to educate them, right? Sometimes we put videos in here, we put training manuals, knowledge-based articles right on the portal to kind of educate people. And then what application is it for? Let's put these services in there. So the CMDB relationship, see, to the point, actually you'll have a successful CMDB rather than one that's just full of a bunch of information and nobody knows what it is and everyone's trying to clean it up, but no one ever does.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can limit, for example, what users can choose there based on, what business line they're a part of. So if you're truly going to offer self-service and one business line only has, a certain number of applications that they could potentially provision, we'll only give them a drop-down with those things. Make it meaningful. Make it intelligent.
Yeah, guide them through the menu, right? I think think of that. Don't ask them anything they don't need. And if we go back to the order and a service section here, the other part you saw was applications, right? If we automated the whole way through, we can put that Puppet or Chef role. We've got IaaS with Chef deployment here. But we can actually put in the Chef role. In this case, I've just got the base Linux choice here. But I could offer a web server, SQL, whatever, Apache, JBoss. What do I want to offer as a stack to them from an IaaS standpoint?
Yeah, and we'll get into this in a little bit of detail more when we talk a little bit more about CloudFormation templates. But this front end's an actual CloudFormation template that actually comes out and does a deployment of our server with Chef.
Yeah, and this is all in ServiceNow, and I'll just kind of jump back to the ServiceNow main portal. What ServiceNow has built in is a workflow editor as well. So I'll just bring that up very quickly. And so this is where you would do a lot of your orchestration, and I'll pick a small example here as soon as the editor pops up here.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, it's pretty complex when you're dealing with orchestrators. There's a lot of code that goes in here that has to be visible and so on and so forth. You can see all of these options that are available, and that's why every orchestrator in general takes a little while to load. Yeah,
and you can see on the right here, these are all our workflows that we have, and I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. We actually built one here around a storage appliance, so Tintri is an example, and we've got here Tintri snapshot of VM, right? So if I click this workflow, what you'll see is it's a workflow that contains a number of sub-workflows. So create a session to the Tintri appliance, get a UUID for the VM, snapshot the VM, and return the snapshot. And you can see on the right-hand side, those are individual workflows. So this goes back to that microservices approach of building out the workflows themselves. And you can see we have all the things like VM creation, all of those. Yeah, the good thing is a lot of these tools now, like this is built in. We don't actually have to modify this workflow. We just drag the VM creation workflow in, present it in our catalog, provide the appropriate variables, and away you go. And that's a ServiceNow approach there. We've also got, VMware vRealize automation here. Not as customizable in the menu, so you've got to jump back in here. So this is the fun of demos on on a webinar here?
Well, while Nick does that, I think I'll hit on the fact of, Nick just showed you the ServiceNow orchestrator. I think there's definitely value to being able to visualize your orchestration path. There are a couple of different ways that you can look at doing this. You know, there's CloudFormation that we'll show you in a little bit, which you're really going to have to understand what you're putting into a text document. I think that, you know, for some users, being able to visualize what's there from an orchestration perspective is helpful. Amazon is, you know, a little newer in providing these services, and they took the stance that we're just going to have a JSON file or a YAML file. You're going to have to specify things in there. So it's a little more in the nerd weeds, but not too much so that you can't grasp it.
Yeah, I think a lot of these things, people, to Tim's point, people get thrown off by the learning curve, I think. And it's not actually, it's more important to the point Tim made before around the menu and the design. And the programming skills are one thing. And you've got developers in a lot of your organizations that can probably help you understand it too. But the programming isn't the only thing. You know, just building the menu and the variables and what that UI looks like is just as important as the programming as well. And here you can see, you know, this is vRealize automation. And here we've built some, you know, multi-machine blueprints here. So you can see we built a infrastructure as a service blueprint for a web app and a MySQL DB, and then we've combined them into a larger blueprint that we said, okay, I want to deploy this bag app. So what I do is I've got my web app service, just a VM, and we've restricted it to one instance in this case, but you could offer them multiple. We've restricted the CPUs from 1 to 4. We restricted the memory from 512 to 4 gig. Storage is standard there. And we've locked in a Puppet role on here for deploying the bag app. So when this VM comes up online, Puppet will be installed, and I'll show you in the orchestrator in a second how that happens. Puppet gets installed, and then it applies that configuration. In the MySQL database, same kind of thing, just another VM, different specification, comes up, Puppet installs the MySQL database. And if you look at the overarching blueprint, we allow, you know, 10 different deployments of this for the user, and these are the deployment IDs that pass off to Puppet. So in this case, Puppet knows, okay, deployment 1, this web server goes with this database server, deployment 2, deployment 3, etc. So we build in all those dependencies, we give the deployments a unique ID, so we can go beyond just an OS and infrastructure as a service, all the way up to the application.
Yeah, using a stack ID like that or using a build ID and passing that to your orchestration engine is one key way that we tie all of those individual infrastructures as service deployments together. And that's just one thing to know. People are always wondering how that happens. Usually it's a build ID.
And the way this all comes together from an orchestration, so vRealize automation in that context, you know, it doesn't have an orchestrator built into it. It passes all the variables off to another orchestration engine, which is vRealize Orchestrator. So there's a lot of VMware people here. You'll know that you have that with your vCenter license. Passes over, and you can see we run a workflow here, machine provision, Puppet Linux. And then it basically goes in and runs this sub-workflow, which I'll click on here, installs Puppet, waits for the Puppet to run, you know, classifies the node, and that's rinse and repeat. And we use, you know, still the same Puppet that we're using across Amazon and on premises, but in this case, you know, we're passing the variables from vRealize Orchestrator, and if we go back to, you know, ServiceNow, in this one, we were basically passing it to Chef via the ServiceNow Orchestrator as well. So again, it's always the orchestrator that's taking effect here. And that's the on-premises example. The one last thing we'll just mention very quickly is we do tie these back to ServiceNow, even if you're using another tool. So if you're using Amazon natively, you'll see some examples in a moment there. But we also have these ServiceNow workflows that you can see down here. And if you don't use ServiceNow, that's okay. It could be BMC, it could be Sharewell, whatever your ITIL tool is. You know, we have workflows that go in and create records as well. They can create the change record. They can update the CMDB. Those are all used as well.
Yeah, the point being here is that even if we're not going to, if you're not going to leverage your ITIL or IT service platform for deployments, and that's okay, you don't have to, it's really important for you to still provide meaningful feedback to that tool about what you just did in your environment. Just because we're automating and orchestrating doesn't mean that we just throw ITIL out the window. You still have to open change requests. You still have to create CIs. You still have to update them as you go along, so on and so forth, so that everybody in the organization is aware of the state of your application and also the state of the objects that are running within your environment.
Yeah, and some people argue, they'll be like, ITIL needs to go away for public cloud. It's not true. It just needs to be adapted and streamlined to work effectively. You still got to know what you have, and who's using it, what's going on with it.
Right. We just got done doing a video on how we can actually provide that meaningful feedback loop around total business service in a previous blog post. We'll provide a link to that later on. I think what the big part of that is that you need to understand that no matter what you do, an ITIL change can potentially impact a business service, and that business service could potentially have other dependencies or have other business services that depend on it. And without providing that feedback, you're not going to give your organization a clear view, or your enterprise organization a clear view of what's up, what's down, and why is my thing down.
Yeah, and sometimes the developers will argue, look, I can't build and test, and it's okay to say, hey, here's another Amazon account. Go here. This is one that there's no ITIL. It's a playground. It's not connected completely to the data center. This is where you play and you build and you test things, and I'm not going to give you those controls there. But when you come into the production data center or the production Amazon VPCs, let's start talking about those. And some of those may involve dev stage and prod too, but they're not sandboxes. And I think it's probably a good segue into your section on,
absolutely.
Using CFTs for IaaS. So, we kind of did the on-premises piece, so now let's look at how we do this in Amazon.
Yeah, so really quickly, Amazon's orchestration methodology leverages a tool called CloudFormation. The important thing for you to understand is that it's free. Amazon wants to make this free. Why? Because it allows you to consume their services. It's not just some little lightweight orchestration tool. It's amazing. It's incredibly powerful. It has all kinds of cases where you can leverage different functions, different sorts of control paths within your CloudFormation tooling. It's really, really amazing what you can do. It's rather declarative, but it has the capabilities so that you can call functions within a CloudFormation template so that it can also fork and so on and so forth. Most importantly, it enables infrastructure as code. So when you're looking to codify a stack of resources, like we took our ag app a little bit earlier, it happens to have a database server and web application server. You would define those objects, and maybe if we're in AWS, maybe we define one as an IaaS instance where we're using an Amazon EC2 instance as a resource in our CloudFormation template, and then maybe we're also specifying an Amazon provided service. Maybe we're using RDS, their database service, right? We can leverage CloudFormation to give us the capability to deploy those solutions in concert, and that's pretty powerful. We're no longer considering just building stacks of VMs. We can certainly do that with CloudFormation, but we're also leveraging that tool to actually come out and provision other things that may not be just an IaaS instance. Okay, so what does it look like? All right, so I alluded to the fact that it kind of looks geeky and it kind of looks nerdy and it's very, very text heavy. I'd just like to call out that Amazon took that feedback, right? And I know it's just iteration one, but Amazon is an incredibly fast-moving company. They take feedback and they take their customers' feedback very, very seriously. Their goal is to delight their customers. And while this may look small, what you see on the right here is an example of a CloudFormation template, or the beginning of one that's done in JSON, which used to be the only way that you could do it. And that's on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, however, is a new example of YAML, which was really recently enabled in AWS, and it's a little more easy to understand. And frankly, it's kind of the direction a lot of new programming environments are kind of trying to take things. It's a little bit easier for their users to understand. So, how can we provide guardrails, understanding that we're using stuff that looks like this? How can we provide enterprise guardrails to CloudFormation, right? One way to do that is by separation of roles. We talked a little bit earlier about how on-prem maybe the networking team would need to take care of the load balancer. Well, that sort of thing is exactly possible with CloudFormation by leveraging nesting and leveraging one CloudFormation template referencing another. So in this use case, we can take, for example, our networking team and allow them to maintain a CloudFormation template that defines what our elastic load balancer would look like in AWS. And then we can provide that service to our application owners who might be in charge of the EC2 instances and maybe some other things down the path for their applications. And they can just reference that CloudFormation template as something that, hey, we should use this. That way you're able to actually segregate roles.
Yeah, and this is key. I mean, the success stories we see are, not a lot of, people reinventing the wheel all the time, right? Reusability, let the experts in their field do the things that they do in their field and manage those pieces and then consume them higher up. It's going to be easier from an operational and supportability standard, going through.
Yeah. So integrating with configuration management. I have on this slide kind of an old way of doing things, but I only have the old way of doing things on here to really call out the fact that really not all that much changes. You can see in that first box, when we have a catalog item, this could be in VRA, this could be in ServiceNow. Frankly, this could be in Jenkins or something. I don't care. Some tool that kind of passes my stuff off to an orchestrator, right? You have the item, and in that item, you pass a variable that has a role that we're going to assign to the end IaaS instance, right? The orchestration engine, and that variable, right, is passed off to the orchestration engine, where it is assigned to that configuration management object. Ultimately, the guest machine has the configuration agent installed, and then that role passed to it as a part of that installation. Then configuration management executes, and in the end, you're happy. Your role's applied. You have maybe a Microsoft SQL Server with your Puppet role.
No real difference in the on-premise.
No real difference. The only difference is really like the CloudFormation tooling that you would use to get that done. You need to pass some variables to the instance to let it know that it needs to first install the agent and then apply this role in whatever configuration management language you would need to talk. Right. That's a little bit different in Chef, a little bit different in Puppet, but realistically, same thing kind of applies. You need an agent on there, you need to tell it what it needs to be, and you need to have that thing check into its master server. We could get into Ansible and Salt Stack as well, but realistically, it's a lot of the same stuff.
If you haven't got a configuration management tool, just pick one of those four. You're still making a good decision, honestly.
Absolutely.
We have these debates all the time, what's better, but just having one is a good thing.
Well, have one and have one that your organization can standardize on. I've been in a lot of meetings where one team has said, we want to use this tool, and another team says we want to use that tool. Well, the first thing that I'll say is, okay, how much organizational knowledge do you have around each of those tools, okay? And that's number one. And then number two, well, maybe that's actually number two. Number one would be, how much investment do you already have organizationally in one tool? How much code have you actually developed? I usually let that stand, and then the amount of people that actually have knowledge of the tool be the second thing that we look at. So another way to add guardrails around an AWS platform, we talked about querying the API. We talked about leveraging CloudFormation to instantiate instances. I think that when you start looking at leveraging an API to do those sorts of things, you have to be able to go back to your security team, to your compliance team, and say, we can be audited. I can tell you that, it was that one guy that spun up that really big instance with the CloudFormation.
Yeah, and I think people hear these terms like CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Lambda in a minute, just take a look at all these things. They're actually very simplistic in their own right. The configurations they can get very advanced, but to get basic understanding and get basic functionality, some of these things you just need to enable and start using.
Yeah, CloudTrail is a great example of that too, Nick. I mean, when you look at what it's really doing, CloudTrail is just taking a look at who did something against the API, and it's taking that information and it's logging it in a lot of cases to an S3 bucket. And then when you look at these partner utilities here, like Splunk and Datadog and Sumo Logic and CloudCheckr, when you look at those, and a lot of people may already have Splunk. Good news. You can leverage Splunk to integrate into your CloudTrail logs to say, hey, there's an event. I know that I shouldn't be spinning up those instances. CloudTrail caught it. We need to move forward with the process to remediate, right? And really, this is how we enable those sorts of guardrails. CloudTrail, super easy. So I think at this point, I really just want to show a little bit of CloudWatch. I'm going to show a little bit of CloudFormation, actually. Yeah, hand me the ball. Let me see here.
Okay, you are now presenter.
All right, so this is where things get complicated, folks, where we pass stuff off. So, technical stuff happening right now.
It's a built-in water tea break, really.
Really, it is. It is. All right, so hopefully that comes up here in just a second. Yeah, okay, thank goodness. Whew. Hard part over. Back to technical talk. Okay, so when we look at, so I'm now in the AWS console, right? This is kind of what Nick was showing a little bit earlier. Wow, look at all these services. There's a lot of stuff to consume here. There's a lot of stuff to understand. But under management tools, we have the capability to click the free utility called CloudFormation. And you'll see what we're leveraging here is a bunch of stack names. Each stack name corresponds realistically to kind of a CloudFormation template. And I'm just going to pick one that we've spun up here so that you can see. This is an orchestrator. So an orchestrator needs to know that it submitted a command and that a command was either successful or failed. An orchestrator needs to know how to roll something back when it's unsuccessful. You might have seen some red stuff a little bit earlier in the demo there, and as a matter of fact, I can go back and show you right after we look through this section. But the red stuff is all stuff that, you know, maybe there was a bad template, maybe somebody was done with the template, so on and so forth. But the red stuff is all something where we decided that, or AWS decided that we needed to roll something back. And it took all of these components that we would be paying for by the hour, by whatever, and rolled them out of our environment. The nice thing about CloudFormation is that if your stack is, if you've got a misconfiguration or if something's not quite working right within your stack, is that it's going to roll that back. And that's one thing that we take, one stance that we take with any orchestration tool that we use. We always write a workflow to go in, and we write a workflow to go out in VRO, UCSD, ServiceNow, so on and so forth. That's something that's just inherent within CloudFormation templates. So if we go in and drill in just a little bit deeper here, and I do not know what happened there, give me 1 second, you can see my CloudFormation template in itself, right? You can see that I provisioned some stuff. What you're going to come across here is definition of resources that you're actually deploying to your account. In this instance, we have an Amazon workspace that we've deployed, right? You can use this exact same capability to deploy an IaaS offering. And as a matter of fact, let me go back and find one that we've done that was just an IaaS, right? I believe that this one is. So when we look at the template, and you'll notice that that last one was in JSON. That was one that we coded a little while ago. You'll notice that this one is actually in YAML. You'll notice that we have AWS EC2 instances, we have the instance type, and then we have the image ID. That image ID is an AMI, kind of like a vSphere template that you would put in your environment. We call that AMI when we're defining what our Web 01 instance looks like. This would also be the area where we would insert information around how to integrate with configuration management, and we would use that to pass options to this host as it's spun up.
Yeah, and you can see how easy it is to get started with these things.
Yeah.
You just go in the GUI, decide what you would provision first, and then get started. Be like, okay, I wanted this EC2 instance with this image ID, this type. Then go and make the CloudFormation template. Just do something basic like that.
Yep.
Then expand. Then add an S3 bucket. Then add an ELB. Then whatever you want to do, and then add your configuration management piece at the end. And if you kind of take that a modular approach, even to your learning as well as how you organize everything in the future, I think it's very quickly you can get up and running with these. And there's tons and tons of reference stacks out there you can grab. On the Azure side as well, when you go into the Azure console and you go and create something, it will actually give you the option before you click OK. It'll say, do you want to download the ARM template? And you can just download it and just modify it for the next one you do. So do one in the GUI and then, modify the next one from there on. How are we doing on time? Yeah. So let's hit a continuous integration and delivery quickly. And then I need to be sharing here.
And I think I just passed the ball to you.
And then I'll hit a bit on operations at the end here.
Yeah.
So we're going to very quickly, we don't have time for a full DevOps kind of discussion today, but I know we wanted to quickly hit how we integrate.
I really just wanted to call this section out. So CI/CD, your CI/CD orchestration engine, Jenkins, whatever. Maybe you need to deploy a WAR file for a Tomcat server, so on and so forth. And maybe as part of that testing process, you want to test that it's going to work in your production environment. As we talked earlier, you can leverage an exposed API from, either VRA, ServiceNow, or even the capability to deploy a CloudFormation template in Amazon as potential endpoints for your CI/CD orchestration tooling. So realistically, we'd call ServiceNow to request that exact same thing that was in the form with some pre-populated values that gets us a fully ready to go, fully baked, successfully backed up if we need to have backups, so on and so forth, IaaS instance, and that gives us those sorts of capabilities.
Yeah, and think about it. I'll just grab the VRA one because it's up here, but just think about it as automating the process of filling in the form.
Yeah.
That's really it. How do I expose all this via an API so I can just call it? And that's what developers don't want to go in there and click, oh, I need 20 of these and 10 of these and this for testing.
They're just going to give you value.
Yeah, so, definitely DevOps is a whole future discussion on tool chains and everything. The last parts are really kind of, hit the area is how do we tie, some of those AWS events back to ServiceNow? And you may have heard of the term Lambda out there. And so when you go to AWS, you'll notice that, you can see the service on here. In fact, I'll hit it from the services. It's under the compute section. And if you click Lambda, this allows you, Lambda in its infancy basically allows you to run a function on an Amazon server basically. So instead of you spinning up an OS and then, running your functions or your program on there, you can just run like Python, Node.js, functions directly, that one function basically. And so we've created a number of these for various different use cases. And so in our lab here, the one we're going to look at, you can see it's called Snow Test 1, Send Snow a REST call. And basically what it does is we've uploaded, if we go to the configuration here, it's Python 2.7, and if we go back to the code, you can see we uploaded a zip file basically here of our Python package. And to look at what that is, if I go over to Visual Studio Code, this is basically just a Python function for sending a REST call. It is no different than that. We've got our payload here, and these are all the fields that we basically want to update in the CMDB. Now, some of these could be variabilized if you wanted to. If you said, okay, this this piece needs to come from something else, we could set it as a variable. And then basically down here, you can see I'm sending my headers with my payload, and I'm sending it to this URL, which is the V1 table REST API for change requests in ServiceNow. And now all I have to do is basically I can even run a single test of this function just by hitting test here. And you can see it's executing. Just take a second. There you go, it's already completed. So Amazon has now sent a REST call to ServiceNow. I've got an OK response. And if I go to ServiceNow and I just do the change list, I'll just refresh this here. You should see one here. And this was an example change that we have that says automated change by AWS scaled bag up due to load. So we don't have time today, but we can do auto scaling groups where apps spin up and spin down. And we don't want to say, oh, we can't spin up an extra node because we have to wait for change control. Well, let's automate the change control. When an extra server spins up with Puppet Age and everything installed in it, let's just notify ServiceNow, create a change request, and if we want to, close out that change request automatically as well. All those things. The other big thing, though, as this starts to take effect, what we've seen a lot of customers is there's a lot of change happening now not initiated by a person anymore.
Yeah.
And people starting to freak out when they go to their change control list. They're like, well, now who did this? Did a person do it? Did an account do it? Did it come from Amazon, Azure? Where was it? And so it becomes more and more important to kind of start to think about ways that you can identify and know where this change occurred. Some of that involves just simple things like in the title, automated change via AWS, and explain what it did. You can put more information in there. You can put a stupid justification like this one. I'm an AI and I perform this change more reliably than humans. Things like that. I mean, it's part of the point that you're going to see more and more of this work happening. Work is happening now from systems, not from people.
I just look at it. I look at ITIL and the change process from an automation perspective as an opportunity. It's just an opportunity to provide people extra additional information about the things that I've automated. That way I'm defensible. If I can provide an update as to why I did every little microservice in my build process, then when an auditor comes, I just go to lunch and get another green tea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's the idea.
And that goes back to just the whole self-healing nature of everything you can do in the public cloud. We want to build things to be self-resilient, and we can do that. And people just want to know, well, what's going to happen? And sometimes things are going to break because you maybe coded something that should be self-healing that didn't self-heal correctly. Well, I still need to be able to troubleshoot. When did this extra node spin up? Is traffic going to a new node now, and that node's not accepting the traffic correctly, and they just say 50% of my users are now experiencing bad web requests? Well, that might happen, but how do I accommodate it? And the benefits outweigh those concerns if you can tie this around it.
Even more so when you're dealing with an enterprise where applications start to depend on each other, right? And there's no way to get out of the capability of knowing how your applications are mapped to one another and how they align with different support organizations. And that's why this is one of the foundational building blocks to being able to automate in an enterprise as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one we'll just show you quickly. This is our big instance COP, as we called it. So, two functions, one basically, we put in, these are our loud instances that we have here. It basically does a check for them. And then if it doesn't pass, we initiate the termination and doesn't allow anybody to basically spin that up. And if they found a way to do it, it routinely checks and goes in and basically deletes instances for us. So these are just two functions, and all we're doing here, this is in Node.js in this case. You can see the previous one was Python. This one's in Node.js. There's a whole bunch of documentation on the Amazon website for these and examples, but you take the examples, modify them. You're basically saying, okay, I want to do something. What's the task I'm trying to do? I want to find out instances of a certain size. Okay, that's what I can do. Or I want to destroy an instance. We'll create a task to destroy an instance. But put some guardrails around your functions too. You don't want, we know who executes this stuff as well, and and test them out properly, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great example of how we've kind of drank some of our own champagne here. I think that what happened was our CTO sent out a message to everybody that's in automation and everybody that's in the AWS side of the house, and said, why is my Amazon bill X $1,000 this month or whatever? And realistically, this big instance cop came in and said, it came in as an idea that somebody just threw out there. I think it was one of our AWS engineers said, hey, it's a perfect example for leveraging Lambda to be able to go in and actually police our environment.
Yeah.
We've taken that same framework and look at leveraging Lambda in AWS, and that framework is something that you can do for just about anything that you can measure within AWS, right? Maybe that's looking at logs for a certain sort of access, ensuring that only a certain key is doing a certain thing within your environment, making sure that no key is actually being used. There's a lot of ways that you can there's a lot of ways that you can use Lambda to provide the glue to tie your AWS environment together. And that's probably a whole other topic for a whole other webinar.
Sounds like we got 5 more webinars.
Five more webinars in 45 minutes.
So just to kind of end off here, we're going to have a little bit of a plug for our Tech Summit in Chicago, if you haven't registered, June 22nd. Yeah, we'll have a lot of this stuff on demo, so you can register on our thinkahead.com website /LA17. And with that said, that kind of wraps up what we wanted to cover. But any, final thoughts from you, Tim, before we kind of open up to Q&A?
No, I'm ready for the Q&A.
Q&A, all right. Any questions?
You guys covered a lot. I think, we got 5 more webinars to do.
A question from Amy Manley about what is cloud like. Thank you, Amy. It's what I live every day.
I'm going to let Tim explain it. I know you know what it is.
I think that's how that came through.
Cloud Life, just for everyone else on the webinar that doesn't know. This is the idea that how do we create this amazing cloud experience? You see the smiley face on screen there. So when you launch your cloud, you advertise it, you make it this compelling experience for developers and people to come to. And it's not just about I stood up some technology. It's about making it meaningful, making it rich, just making IT exciting again. I think that's a key thing. Providing your end users the capability to have a feedback loop about what they like about the cloud and what they don't like about the cloud. We've seen that as a huge option as well, right? Like, how can we? What additional service should we enable, right? And then absolutely. Realistically, I think AWS takes a great view of this. It's how do we delight our customers, right? Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the best way to put it. Any other questions?
That's
just the one from Amy.
That's it. Just that Cloud Life.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. If any follow-ups, feel free to send them in. But we'll get the recording up there, and just thank you. We appreciate your time. Thanks very much.